Alright guys, today we're going to be narrowing up this forward 9-inch rear end. I'm going to have to cut off all these janky ass 4-link brackets that were put on here before by somebody else, and the shock mount brackets. So I'm going to start by cutting these off with the plasma cutter, get the tubes all cleaned up, and I'll show you guys how we're going to measure this out and narrow it. So I finally got those brackets cut off, got the tube or the housing cleaned up pretty well. Somebody got a hold of it before me and tried to cut those brackets off, and they got some pretty deep gouges with their cutoff wheel, and then there's some undercut from whoever welded those brackets on. Undercut is when you are digging too much, whether that be with a stick electrode or your MIG or your TIG. You're digging too much and you're not depositing enough material back into it. It will take away from the parent material, and basically I don't want to grind that deep into that housing. So what I'll do is I'll just fill that up with some weld and grind it down smooth. I'm probably going too far on this thing. I'm definitely not making enough money on it, but I'd like it. I want it to go out of here nice and clean, so that whatever they decide to do with it, if they're gonna have me powder coat it or if they want to paint it, it'll be nice and clean. So let's get to narrowing. All right, so I'm getting ready to narrow this thing to start cutting. And what I did was I found center of the rear end. I've got this little measuring tool, and that's actually for measuring the length of the axles. But this gentleman wants this rear end to be 42 inches total. That is to the face of the differential flange. So the differential flange right here, the bearing flange, would be 42 inches to that, okay? And then depending on what brake setup you use, you're going to add another inch, and also when you slide the axles in, I can't remember the exact number, but you're going to have a gap here between this face and the axle flange, and then your brakes. But I know he wants this 42 inches flange to flange, from the bearing flange to bearing flange. So what I did was I went ahead and took my 42 inches, right? I know that each one of these flanges is 1 inch, and those are going back on there. So I'm going to take those out, right? That's 40 inches, okay? I'm going to divide that by 2, and I'm going to have 20 inches, okay? So I'm going to measure from center out 20, center out 20, okay? And then that's where our cut will be. I'm going to cut these flanges off first because they want to reuse them. And another important thing is to mark exactly where this flange was. You can take a cutoff wheel, cut a groove here, cut a small groove here, just so that you know you get them clocked correctly when you go back together with it. If you cut those off and you get them twisted, you're going to be screwed. So let's get to cutting. So I go ahead and use a bandsaw. You can use a cutoff wheel if that's all you've got, but I have a bandsaw, so I'm going to use it. And what I do, just to make sure that that face is super square, is I go ahead and I take an inclinometer and I match it off of my vise face to make sure that I get the same reading from the axle tube to the vise face to make sure it's square. I forgot to show you guys this. So when you mark your line to line up your flange, you're going to want it to extend past the point of where you're cutting, obviously. Otherwise, you're going to lose your mark. What I do is, this is a small piece of 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch angle. You could use 1 inch, whatever. But if you lay that and get it nice and flat to where the entire face is resting on your tubing, you can use this for roll cages, for when you're going to bend or whatever. That's a good way to make sure you're nice and you got a straight line. So that's how I did that. And then I marked my flange on this side. I just put an X here and an X there, so I know which side is which. All right, so we went ahead and got our axle tubes cut down. I cleaned them up with a flap wheel. I'll go ahead and clean it a little more. I like to get the face of the tube nice and smooth. You can see how porous it is, and that'll get a bunch of porosity in your weld. Also, we're going to want to clean up the inside of this thing because it's years and years of gear oil in there. That'll screw you up as well. But we got those cut off nice and square, and these are our old flanges, right? These are our housing flanges. That's where your bearing, your axle bearing presses into, okay? Now you can buy these online. You can buy new ones, and honestly, that's what I generally recommend, but this customer just wanted to reuse their ends, so they'll obviously need to press in some new studs. But do you remember how I was saying I marked the tube and the flange? I marked each one to know which one was which, right? I've got an X on this side and just a hash on the other, and I've got my line that I made earlier to make sure the flange is facing the correct way. If you weld this thing up and you've got the flange clocked, you're going to be screwed. So anyhow, I'll go ahead and get these flanges cleaned up, and I'll bevel those out. Then we'll TIG weld them up with our edge cups and our Everlast 255 EXT. But yeah, the flap wheel works real well to get this all smoothed out. Like I said, it had all those brackets on it and stuff, and I don't know what this guy's going to do with it, if they're just going to paint it, I'm guessing. But again, we measured center. I've got this little tool that's for actually measuring your axle length, but what I did was measured the entire width of the housing itself, then found center, and I think I marked that there. Found center, and then divide your number by 2, which your difference between lengths by 2. Ours was 42 inches. We wanted total length. The flange is 1 inch a piece, so we made the housing itself 40 inches long. Okay, now on a 9 inch, one tube is going to be longer than the other. If you look, this tube is shorter than this one. That's because on a 9 inch, your pinion is offset. Okay, on an 8/8 it's centered, but on a 9 inch it's offset. So if you end up cutting the tubes equal length, you would have to have your axles cut equal length, and then your rear end or your drive shaft would never line up with your trans tunnel, with the drive shaft tunnel. So a little more information there. But yeah, and I like to put a good bevel on it, so that we get some deep penetration, get full penetration on it. You can MIG weld this as long as you're very careful not to distort it, to warp it, but we'll TIG it up. Alright guys, so what I did here was I went ahead and cleaned up and beveled my ends, got my lines all lined back up. What I do is I make a template off of my flange and use all thread to suck the whole thing together. Helps to make sure you keep it flush, keep them all squared up. Now on mine, what I did was I cut right at the weld. I've done these a few times before, so I know right where to line them up. But for you, if it's your first time, you might want to leave just a small lip of the 3-inch axle tube there to make sure that you get it all lined up perfectly. Now you can clamp that together with 2 pieces of angle, top and bottom, side to side, if you want to help you keep it lined up. And then also I go and I make quarter tacks. So I'll tack here, 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 and here to make sure that the flange stays square and doesn't move on us. So I've got it all tacked up, and we'll go ahead and weld it up and it'll be done. I'll be using my edge welding GL10 cup. Got plenty of shielding for what we're doing here. I'm running a 3/32 tungsten and a 1/16 ER70 S2 or S6, whichever you prefer, filler wire. What I did was I welded between the quarter tacks on the top and then flipped it over between the quarter tacks on the bottom. Then that gives that side a chance to cool, and when I get done with these halves, I'll go over there or these quarters, I'll go over there and weld up the others. And I think I'm running, I just keep my machine turned up, but I think I'm running like 200 amps, so this is 1/4 inch thick material, but since I've got it beveled, it doesn't take as much. Rule of thumb, sorry that air compressor purge is a bitch. Rule of thumb is 1 amp per thousandths thick material, so if you're running 1/4 inch, that would be 250 thousandths, that'd be 250 amps roughly for mild steel and stainless. I did clean the inside of this tube really well because it's lived its entire life in gear oil, so I want to make sure it's damn clean. Alright, so got my first pass on there. I'm gonna go ahead and I'll let this cool down completely. I'll probably let it cool down overnight, but let it cool down. I don't have to do it overnight. You could wait an hour and come back and do it, but I'm gonna let it cool overnight because I'm done for the day. But what I'll do is I'll come back out with some 045 filler and I'll just cap this entire thing and make it super pretty. But yeah, weld it up nicely. Everlast welder of champions. Edge welding products. These guys are the shit. Try out their cups. Stacia is the owner, or one of the owners, her and her husband. American made, everything's American made. All their cups are made in-house by hand, every single one of them made by hand. And it's her, her husband, and 2 sons. They hand blow all these and do everything in-house. Like I said, all the glass is sourced in America, and they are the best cups on the planet. And talk about just amazing human beings. They are super good people. Alright guys, so what I did here was I got my first pass in. Okay, got my first pass in. What I'm going to do now, you can see that the weld profile is still a little bit low. There's some undercut here. So I used a 1/16 filler rod yesterday, and now today came in, got it cleaned up with a wire brush and some acetone. And now I'm going to take an 045 filler wire and cap this off and make it real nice and pretty. Running my edge cup. This one's pretty tits. It works well for tight places like when welding roll cages and stuff. But I like it on something like this because it's going to provide shielding in this direction as I make my pass. That one's my favorite cup. Get all my mess of cables. I really need to buy that wireless pedal from Everlast. That's pretty bitchin'. All right. Get this welded up. So when I end my weld, when I end my bead, what I'll end up doing is I kind of back out of the pedal and circle and go ahead and dab a little extra wire. Looks like I can turn my gas flow up just a little bit now that I changed cups. Running like 38 CFH with this cup. Over here and rotate. I'm starting off in the middle of the last dab that I went with. That last dab that I made that I was telling you guys, I add a little extra filler and back out real slow. That's how I'm going to tie in my next bead, is right in the middle of that one. Like I said, running 045 wire just to get rid of that undercut and cap this weld off. That's what your shielding should look like, you know. With mild steel, you're going to have a little bit of color in it. With stainless, you want a completely colorless weld. You want it all shiny silver or golden, wheat golden like this is okay, is acceptable. But with this just being mild steel, we're okay. And again, depending on the size of cup you use, your gas flow, that's going to determine a lot of that. Go ahead and tie into my next. Keep that gas flow, keep that post flow flowing over your weld. Looking good. Alright guys, this concludes our how to narrow a Ford 9-inch rear end. Got her all welded up. Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and blend out some of these factory lines, and you can see some garbage there. We had sandblasted it first just to get it all cleaned up. But yeah, you can do this right in your home garage. You don't have to have a ton of equipment. As long as you stick to your measurements and make sure you get these cut off nice and square, anybody can do it. With a grinder, like I said, you can MIG weld these. You don't have to TIG weld them. Just be conscious of the rotation of your flanges. Make sure that you mark those before you cut, and you should be golden. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Juggernaut Weld Fab. Go to our Facebook and our Instagram. This is our messy shop, but yeah, we do all kinds of fun stuff.